Didn't understand a word of the introduction, but everything she said, I'm sure, is true. Okay, welcome to the graveyard slot. They put me after lunch. I'm the warm-up act to what comes next, which is Catherine talking about all great things in the Michaela way. So this session is about leadership, creating schools that last. My name is Ben Laker. I'm a professor at Henley in the UK. And as been discussed, I also lead an institute at Oxford University called the Center of High Performance, and I lead educational research at Harvard in the States. So this session, all about creating schools that last from a leadership perspective. There are three component parts to any learning organization. And we know this already: curriculum, assessment, and teaching. Much of what has already been discussed today. If you think what Edie Hirsch has talked about, the father of the knowledge-rich curriculum taken further by Daisy, and if you've read the Seven Myths, you will know the power of what a knowledge-rich curriculum is, and absolutely the fundamental impact it has on the lives of our children within schools. But that's not enough. We also need the right kind of assessment techniques, and of course, we have known for a long time the impact of teaching and learning. To better understand these three component parts, what I like to call the scholarly fabric of any learning organization, Pim Pollen and I, where are you, Pim? He's out there. There he is. Everyone wave at Pim. Pim's not very happy because he has to pay my bill. It's all good. So to better understand the scholarly fabric that we call these three component parts of a learning organization, we did a little bit of research to understand where are the future concerns of people working within these particular areas. So what's coming down the track for those working in curriculum? We know knowledge-rich curriculum is in vogue right now, but where are the future constraints? Where are the future concerns? What's the changes that are going to be taking place that we all need to be knowing about? Same for assessment, same for teaching. And to do that, we spoke to around 75,000 teachers across the world from organizations and various countries, including here in the Netherlands, Italy, Germany, Turkey, South Africa, and Mozambique. 75,000. It's a big study. Big study. Wasn't quite as big as the study that Greg was talking about earlier, but it was still big. What did we find? We found some really interesting things. In summary, we found that teachers felt very comfortable in certain areas. They're listed here as qualities. I'm not going to read all of them, but some of these you will be well aware of. Dealing with behavior. Behavior techniques have been around for a long time now. Teachers on the whole, and I would suggest 75,000 is a decent sample size to be representative of the wider education community. We feel comfortable in that area. However, there are certain areas where our teachers do not feel comfortable, and we call them challenges. So, for example, the main one, using evidence-based research effectively. That is a huge gap. And that is why we have organizations flourishing, such as ResearchEd, that I would highly recommend that you attend. Organizations like this where we come together and share practice, and so on. For us, this was really powerful because it started to ascertain where the gaps were in the development of our teachers. And we know universally that many teachers are leaving the profession. They started to explain why. They do not feel supported within a whole range of areas. So taking that forward, just to really conclude what that study showed, was significant gaps between their competency and their ambition. In other words, where I am now and where do I want to be? Where do I want to be better? Where is my career on track to take me? And these are said areas. So we see evidence-based research comes up again. Self-efficacy, responsibility. Lots of content here that they feel is not being addressed. So to take you back to the previous slide, I started the day by saying that there were 3 component parts of any learning organization, and that is true. But what holds the fabric together? Leadership. That is what is lacking. That is what we see a huge deficit within learning organizations such as schools, but not just schools, also universities and higher education colleges. Without defined, effective leadership, teachers, and therefore schools, cannot be successful. And leadership is the compounding effect of these 3 component parts. You may know that Albert Einstein, he was a clever guy, yeah? He was clever. He said the most powerful force in the universe is the force of compounding. So leadership, think of it like this. Leadership, you might have a successful knowledge-rich curriculum. Without defined leadership, you have nothing. With leadership, it compounds together. It compounds. Same with assessment. Same with teaching and learning strategies. You bring those together, you build an effective school. From one Einstein to the modern Einstein, Margaret DeWitt. Where's Margaret? She's somewhere here. Margaret's at the back. Everyone wave at Margaret. The modern Einstein. That's the first and last time you'll ever be called that. She said exactly what I've just said. Effective leadership creates successful schools. That's what's missing. That's the gap. Everyone can learn to become an effective leader. Sounds pretty simple. How is it done? When I flew over this morning to the Netherlands, I went on Google, I typed in school leadership. Over 1 million things came up. I am a speed reader. I managed to read half of them, but there were half I didn't manage to read. The conclusion here is there is so much content just within the education, school leadership space, let alone the wider leadership and management space, that if we know leadership is the answer, what is the right question? There are thousands of different leadership types. Which one works? Which one should be adopted within your school? That's the question that I've spent the last 7, 8 years trying to answer. So I led a big piece of research at Harvard to try and find the answer, if you like. And where I started out was thinking about all the previous studies that have looked at education leadership. What have they missed? Because I was certain that there were pieces around the periphery that had been missed. And sometimes you hear leadership gurus and they talk about creating an effective learning climate. And I would hear that and I would say, what the hell do you mean? These are buzzwords. It means nothing. I need to know categorically, what do you mean when you say create effective climate? I need to be able to measure it. I need to be able to do it. I need to be able to teach it. I need to be able to see it. I need to be able to walk into a school and say, that is the leadership type that is effectively leading and impacting the lives of children. It can be replicated. It's not based on an individual persona. So I looked at a number of things that had never been looked at before. The belief system of a leader. Most research in the world looks at behaviors because behaviors are quite easy to measure, the category. But behind every behavior, there is a belief system. It's not visible. You have to dig beneath to find it. And that was something that I wanted to ascertain. Why do we believe schools are successful, and why indeed do they fail? But also, from a societal perspective, which leaders do we hold up on a pedestal? Which ones do we pay the most money to? Which ones are on stage the most? At fabulous conferences like this one, and so on and so forth. What was their previous experience? You boil it all down, it was a very big piece of work. We now fast forward 7 years, and I can tell you what I found. Do you now feel 7 years older? 7 years. Gone like an instant. Okay. I concluded that based on all of those things, the belief system of a leader, the societal output, their behaviors, their actions, their attitudes, their foundational psychology, that there are 5 types of school leader, and only 5. What do we have here? The first one, we have someone who is incredibly short-term focused. They're focused on themselves. They're highly individualistic. They're highly visible. They're often on social media. They have an individual brand. They're held up. In the UK, we call these individuals superheads. And question B, you could argue they are super because in a very short space of time, they're able to have significant impact. They focus on the year groups which are taking tests. They do not focus on the year groups which are not. We have a second type of leader, equally short-term focused, but this time their vision is all around efficiency, back office, support staff, creating resources, tightening process, immediate focus on cost. Third type, we have an accountant. This type of leader, we're finding more and more of, particularly within the UK, as schools start to group together in what we call multi-academy trusts. Because their core foundational belief is that resources equals effectiveness. What I mean by that is the more resources I have, for example, teachers, shared curriculum, shared knowledge, money, I'm able to move it around my family of schools so that the schools in need receive the support they need. Philosopher, fourth type, someone who is very focused on pedagogy, teaching and learning, the fundamentals of teaching. And then lastly, we have an architect, someone who has a wider vision, long-term focus, who seeks to redesign schools, transforms local communities. So 5 different types. What you can start to see here is that only one type has what I like to call the long-term sustainable impact. That is the architect. That's why I call them architects. If you wanted to know more about the study, it went zeitgeist. It went everywhere. So BBC did a lovely show. Given the size and the scale of the study, the findings to some were controversial. I like to think of it as shining a light where no light had shone before. So a little bit more detail of the 5 types. Their style is very, very different. Their approach is different. So is their focus. But for me, the key takeaway is the impact not during their tenure, but after. What is the legacy that a leader leaves? I like to think about leadership as holding a very expensive vase on an ice rink, and you've never skated before, and your job is to move the vase from here to the other side of the ice rink. The point being, when you hand that vase on, it's in an equal, if not better shape than when you found it. That's what leadership is. So for me, if there is only one type that leaves a school in a better place than when they found it, that should be the only time that we welcome within our schools. It's a little bit more about the architects. They redesign and transform their schools with an emphasis on long-term impact. I'm pleased to say that after me, you will hear from an architect. You've heard about the Michaela Way. I'm deliberately not looking her way as to not embarrass her, but she knows who she is. And she knows she was an architect before I told her today. Architect school leaders are those who first and foremost are focused on their school, their children, and their parents. They're not building their personal brand. They care about their communities first and foremost. And for me, the saddest finding from that piece of research was that the architect leader is the most likely to lose their job because of the system in which we operate. They're the least paid, they're the least rewarded, they're the least developed. The reason for this, they do not create short-term impact, which I found to be criminal. So more on that later. But where I'm starting to warm you up is, I am fighting a cause, and as you know, one person is not many. 620, that's a good amount of people. So a little spoiler alert for the end of my session. We must, and we are going to create a paradigm shift. And we are going to build more architect leaders in our schools. More on that later. Let's hear a little bit more about the knowledge, the expertise, the capability of architect leaders. They use system thinking. They have holistic approaches to everything that they do. Many architect leaders, they get invited to places like this. And they say, I would love to be here today, but I can't come. My school needs me. Now, arguably, the school doesn't need them, because the very best architect leaders are able to leave their school and nothing happens. Nothing happens because they built a sustainable system that can survive and indeed thrive long after they've gone. But the point here is they feel morally obliged not to build their personal brand, but to support and create the legacy of that school. And that's what you're going to hear about after me. When you hear about the Michaela Way, you think about the legacy of that school. Now, everything I've said so far sounds fantastic, it sounds lovely, but does it really have any impact? That's what the people at Harvard said to me after I made this big pitch to them. They said, you know, it sounds great, but does it have any impact on the bottom dollar? Because that's all we really care about. We're a business school. And I said, well, actually, it's funny you should ask, because the answer is yes. The answer is yes. We ran a second study. We ran it with Forbes. And again, this was another 3 years of work summarized onto one slide. So sometimes it's really difficult, you know, because I can remember the long nights, those 3 years, and you see it in one slide and you just go, that's it. But it was a very, very long piece of work. It's very difficult, but we got there in the end. And we concluded that having a long-term sustainable leadership style within our school not only impacts the lives of the children in that school and its wider community, but actually, if we were to develop a nation of architect leaders, now, okay, 100%, it's a little bit too ambitious, but let's, for argument's sake, say 1 in 2, 50%. We would increase GDP by $7.6 billion. That's a big number. That's a really big number. And the point here is a long-term sustainable impact better impacts the lives of children. There is then a compounding effect because they go on and flourish and thrive and do better and greater things. They reach their potential. They reach beyond their potential because they believed in a vision that you have given to them. $7.6 billion. That's just in the UK. It's a very small country. It's getting very, very smaller. That's a Brexit joke. It's a Brexit joke. Let's go to a bigger country, the US. They ran the same study, and they said, we have more people living in the US, therefore the number's bigger. Bigger and better. That's what they say in the US. Bigger and better. Their number was 45 billion. The point here is that for the first time ever, we can not only have societal but also economic data that says taking the longer approach to focus on individual children, no matter what their ability, and not being pressured to cut corners and to make quick wins, actually has enormous societal and economic impact and value. So where do we go from here? Well, the third piece of work I did after this, everyone said, well, okay, this architect leadership model, you've been banging the drum for some time now, you're not going away. Tell us a little bit more. How do we actually do it? How do we behave in such a way within our school? So the third half of the piece that I wrote was to look exactly that and to give school leaders like yourselves a blueprint and really to categorize what is it that architect leaders do in their school. So I want to show you 9 things that they do. The first thing I like to call challenge. So they make an immediate commitment for the long term. And again, this was another 2 years. I'm going quite fast because I want to get it in, but there's a lot of work that went underneath this. They make a big commitment. They focus on not just teaching the students in front of them, but starting to think about that wider journey. So in the UK, where we have our primary, secondary, and beyond, what is that total journey of the child? How can we embed a knowledge-rich curriculum not just within the secondary, but also within a primary-age child? No more are they taught by a generalist, but actually we value the knowledge-rich curriculum all the way through, and ensuring that no child, wherever possible, is excluded from learning. Staff, at least half of them, during your tenure, should be developed in some way or another. And develop does not necessarily mean staying within the same school. You might grow said person and they fly. And that's okay because that's their development journey. But they may also find opportunities within your school to do something different, to do something unique, to do something more valuable. Having good tension, I'll say that. Good tension, that's the polite way. Good tension with their governance. Not across everything, but on at least half of all decisions made within the school. Good, positive tension. Where at all possible, having at least 95% of students within the school. In the UK, we have this crazy measure where we measure student attendance. If they turn up and they come through the door, that's categorized as being in. Doesn't matter if they haven't been to the lesson. If they're in the building, they're in. I asked you, what learning have they received coming in? None. So my big challenge here, I have many challenges in life, this is one of them, is trying to get the government to actually recognize that being in a lesson is very different than being in the building. And the point here is, Architect Leader leads schools whereby at least 95% of students are in a lesson, and second, they are learning. And you all know about behavior for learning, so I'm not going to go into all that. But they're engaged, they're learning something. And then lastly, we have engaged parents. We have engaged staff, and we have capable staff. What you start to see on this model are some key variables. It's underneath the headings that I've given you. Those key variables are the tipping point. So if you've read Malcolm Gladwell's work on tipping point, you will know you start to achieve a law of diminishing returns at certain points in time. Thereafter, the amount of effort you put in is not relative to the impact you get. So on this triangle of triangles, what you see for each of those 9 measures is the exact tipping point whereby impact will occur. Okay? So for example, you may stay longer than 5 years within your school, but the tipping point will occur once you have gone past 5. You may have 100% of parents engaged within your school. Great, but the tipping point is at half point. It's halfway. They are the tipping points. They are not the end point. So 9 key things. When you see that on the screen, it doesn't sound too hard. So my question to you is, of the 9, which is most important? Second question, is there an optimum order of implementation and execution? I like this point because it just goes silent. Is there an optimum point? Normally, if I had longer, I would tease you out and I would, I'd make this point last for hours. I don't have hours, so I'm going to tell you. Is there an optimum order? Is there a particular category that has more impact than the others? When I went back to have a look at the data, my mind, it blew. The answer is no. None of those 9 factors are more important than any other. No, there is no optimum order. Better still, the law of diminishing returns, the tipping point, occurs when you embed 6 of the 9. Therefore, you can conclude, if you want to be an architect leader, look at those 9 things, not as a recipe, as a menu. And you sit down in your schools and you say, of these 9 things, which are we already doing? Which are easiest for us to implement? And choose your 6. And that's all you need to do. Choose your 6 of 9. And that is where you will create the significant impact. That's the tipping point, 6 from 9. So to come into a close, because I've had the 5-minute warning. Did you see that? Yeah. Paradigm shift. I can't do it on my own. And I don't lead a school, so actually it's not my job. I'm just a researcher. You guys are leading the practice. We need a paradigm shift. I've told you why. It has significant economic, societal benefits. But also, it's about having a moral purpose. It's about doing the right thing. And for the first time ever, we now know that doing the right thing is the right thing. The slide at the start, the 3 component parts of the learning organization, we now rip that up. We now know there are 4 parts. 4 parts of the learning organization: curriculum, assessment, teaching, but also leadership, for all the reasons that I have said. So for me now, one of the most exciting learning organization models in the world is one that you have on your table. This is the newly formed at-school model, which is very evidence-based. It follows everything that I've told you today. It's a way forward of ensuring that value is created within our schools, that outcomes for students are best realized in the most long-term sustainable way, which not only impacts the economy, but also the society. I'm going to end now. I hope this has given you food for thought. And as you go forward from this session, ask yourself the question, what legacy do I want to leave when I pass my commitments on to the next person? Thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of your time here today.